Good Thursday night to you, and thank you for joining us tonight. I am Thabo Mdluli. A study by the British Medical Journal found that for every 10% of ultra-processed foods was associated with a 12% risk of overall cancer and 11% risk of breast cancer. These findings add to the strong body of evidence linking poor diet with obesity and chronic diseases, including diabetes and cancer. Now, as the country commemorates National Nutrition Week, we ask the question, is it reasonable to hold processed food companies liable for contributing to chronic disease? And is the government doing enough to address malnutrition in the country? Joining me to unpack this conversation is nutritionist and Eat Well, Live Well ambassador with Tiger Brands, Arthur Ramoroka, Department of Health Nutrition Director Rebone Ntsie, Consumer Good Council of South Africa nutrition consultant Linda Drummond, as well as Association of Dietetics South Africa President Maria van der Merwe. And we also have with us cancer survivor Bongani Makama. And you can be a part of this conversation tonight, or send us your WhatsApp on 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us at Newzroom405. The debate is on whether or not big food should be held financially liable for obesity and other food-related health issues, or, as they argue, consumers should be held responsible for their own action because consumption is voluntary. What are your thoughts on that? Let's hear your views tonight. Meanwhile, good evening to you all, and thank you very much for joining us tonight on In Focus.
Good evening.
Bongani, let's start with your story as well before we get into this conversation. Bongani is joining us on the line. Relate to us, Bongani, your journey with this disease and how it is linked to the diet and the food that you had access to at the time.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, as a cancer survivor, I am really grateful for what the doctors have done. I'll start by saying that. But my journey, it was actually not such a wonderful journey because I discovered that I had cancer 2018 and have been going to oncology. I've been doing treatment. I've been up and down, not even going to work. So it has actually affected me quite a lot financially and also physically.
And are you able, or the doctors able to link and give you proof of direct causality between the disease that you suffered and the food products that you consumed?
Funny enough, when I was in hospital, one of the doctors that was treating me actually mentioned that that's processed food that actually causes cancer. And he actually says that processed food activates some of the cancer cells in our bodies. As humans, we have cancer cells in our bodies that are inactive, but with processed food that we eat, it becomes active. So since then, I've stayed away from processed food. I've stayed away from milk. I've stayed away from canned food. I've stayed away from canned tomatoes. I've stayed away from a lot of things like bacon. I've stayed away from it.
Yeah. And if you reflect closely, the medical costs due to this disease or due to this processed food, I mean, what is the number? What's the quantum? How much have you spent?
Phew. I can't even imagine it because I even lost the job that I was doing. I lost my job due to me not being present at work. Now and again, I have to go to the hospital to get treatment, and I couldn't drive. I had to hire someone to drive me to hospital. I had to pay people to help me, and I had my family members were suffering because of me, because of the condition that I had. And yeah, basically it's the processed food. As human beings, as we grow up eating bacon, we grow up eating hamburgers, we grow up eating all kinds of canned foods, canned tomatoes, canned everything. So yeah, I'm actually paying. I actually paid for it.
Now, as a cancer survivor, what's your feeling? Should companies contribute financially to related illnesses and health costs, as well as be forced to change the labeling and their marketing strategy?
To be honest with you, I believe that they should change their labeling and their marketing strategy, mainly because I believe that people should know the risk of taking the food, of taking that bacon, of taking that milk, of taking that hamburger, So I do believe that companies should be responsible for the medical bills.
Yeah. Bongani, I appreciate your time and thank you very much for coming through and joining us tonight and relating your story. Linda, let me bring you in here. Do consumers have a right to expect that the foods that they purchase and consume will be safe and of high quality?
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the rest of the panelists. And thank you, Bongani, for sharing your story. I think it really brings the topic home in terms of, how this affects people, what we eat, our health affects not only us as individuals, our families, the economy as a whole. And it's, just sharing your story with all of us and the listeners is really important, just to really understand what it means at a very personal level. So thank you for that. To answer your question, Thabo, I definitely agree that the food industry itself is responsible for producing foods that are safe, of a high quality, and are communicated in a way that is not misleading to the consumers in any way. So I'll just answer it that way, and maybe if you'd like to, ask me to expand, I can do so.
No, I mean, I understand that there's a broader role, of course, that consumers play. There's a broader role that government plays. But while consumers and government and other role players are important in this equation, ensuring food safety and quality in a free market society, the ultimate responsibility for food safety would be, I suppose, on the food industry itself. And therefore, is it a right, is it an expected thing that the food that they put in those packages is of highest safety and of high quality?
Absolutely. I mean, it is a consumer's right, but to talk about whose responsibility it actually is everyone's responsibility. The Food and Agricultural Organization actually has a day where they raise awareness around food safety, and their messaging actually highlights the role of every stakeholder in the food value chain. So the people producing the food, the people regulating the food to ensure that there's compliance and those regulations are enforced, but also the consumer, what the consumer does with that food at home, how much of that food is consumed, how it's stored, etc. So whilst, yes, at the production level, the food industry is responsible, we all have a role to play, throughout the value chain in order to ensure that it's safe and is of the quality that it was when it was first produced.
All right. Let's bring you into the conversation then, Rebone. As far as the role that government plays in this particular equation, what does government do to ascertain that the food that is supplied is healthy?
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers. Indeed, government has to ensure that the food that is given to the public is safe, is of good quality, and contributes to their health. And as a result, I'll just mention, to set the one example now, this week, you have mentioned at the beginning that is National Nutrition Week, which started on Saturday the 9th and is ending on the 15th. And on the 16th is actually World Food Day. Those are some of the efforts that government is doing to actually raise awareness around healthy eating and raise awareness about benefits of eating healthy foods, and ensuring that people have access and get information, correct information that will guide them in making healthier choices. So those are some of the things that are done, but also we have made various settings accessible to people for healthier living and healthy information on healthy living. Yeah. For example, our clinics on a regular basis, people are given information at schools. We are working very closely with DBE as the Department of Health, we're working with the Department of Basic Education, Agriculture, Social Development, that even in settings where social relief programs are taking place and people are there, there's information given. And also, some of the things that we are working on is on the regulations on labeling of food to ensure that food is labeled in such a way that people are able to look at it and see what is healthy or not, or what to make better choices, if I may put it that way. We are busy with the process of formulating regulations of front of pack labeling, where people will look at the front of pack and just by seeing that, seeing that in this pack, very close, not far away, not at the back, with big writing to see this food is high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt, for example, and people will know that it can then contribute to foods, to illnesses, for example, non-communicable diseases like hypertension, diabetes, and so on. Right. And the other issues that we are dealing with is to ensure that there's production of food at the local level. The Department of Agriculture is actually supporting even smallholder farmers to ensure that they are able to produce food so that it's easily and is accessible and affordable at the local level.
All right, Rebone, let's take a break. We'll continue in a moment in this conversation. Arthur Ramoroka, Rebone, Ntsie, and Linda Drummond, Maria van der Merwe as well with us tonight. We'll get your views, 072-110-555. Back with you tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. Thanks for staying on as the nation observes and commemorates Nutrition Week. We're talking here the position of South Africa on nutrition and what some of the things that we need to do, particularly to start leading a healthy life. And Arthur, that's where you come in, and broadly, that's the work that you do as an ambassador. Where does South Africa stand in terms of nutrition? Are we eating nutritiously? What will the statistics tell us?
Thanks, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers at home. I mean, South Africa, like much of the rest of the world, we are undergoing what we call a nutrition transition, and that means that on average, we are consuming more energy from fast foods and sugar-sweetened beverages, and also our own very busy lifestyles often see us prioritizing convenient meals instead of cooking fresh from home. And on top of that, many of us don't exercise and move more often as we should be doing that. And in the studies that we've done through the Eat Well Live Well Institute, we found that South Africans also prioritize taste, cost, and promotion, respectively, as some of the most important factors when they decide to buy or eat food, But also, we know that these are influenced by various socioeconomic determinants, like where people live, their income level, the accessibility to food, and also just the affordability to food as well, and various other factors that may be contributing to that. Yeah. So in general, we see that we are experiencing both overnutrition and undernutrition as well, given all these different factors that are actually contributing to the nutrition challenge. Yeah. But also on the more positive side, there are people who are now prioritizing their health, and I guess now the pandemic as well has prompted many of us to be more mindful of our overall health and well-being so that we can make the right choices for ourselves and our families as well.
Yeah, and you've mentioned palatability. I mean, how important to the palate of South Africans is the question of salt, sugar content, and so forth, in as far as what they tend to gravitate towards?
Yeah, for sure. We know that there is a high discretionary salt intake and sugar intake as well, which sometimes people might not be aware of the debilitating effects around health, which could be contributed by that. But I guess also what we have seen in a recent report we've done as well was that more and more people were now limiting their sugar intake. And I guess the initiatives that have been done by government, from sugar tax and also sodium regulations, have also just highlighted the importance why people need to cut back on all of these nutrients that we need to be limiting in our diet so that we can reduce, the prevalence of all these lifestyle diseases that we see.
Yeah. So how do you maintain the nutrients levels that we require in food ingredients while still, for example, being economically advantageous towards those with low income?
Yeah, and I think that is a very important question. And I think when we look at the overall nutritional quality of food, it becomes important to add nutrients that are more positive, like vitamins and minerals, which we know some of them are lacking in the South African diet, but also protein continues to be one of the most important nutrients. We should not only be looking at those nutrients that we see as negative or of public health concern. The overall quality of the product needs to be looked at. And I guess also one of the things that as the food industry we are doing is looking at everyday affordable nutrition products that offer nutrition to solve some of these challenges so that we're going to have a nation that has good public health outcomes.
Yeah. Maria, globally, but also in the South African context, what are we doing right, as far as building our nutrition as well as a healthy framework? I mean, how do we even begin to measure a healthy nation?
Thank you, Thabo. I think the first point that's positive is the awareness about nutrition and the awareness of the role that nutrition plays in health and wellness, which includes cognitive development, which includes, in the end, economic growth, and overall reduction of risk of acute and chronic illnesses. That translates again to healthcare costs. So it is the decade of nutrition, and over the last 8 to 10 years, there has been significant investment into nutrition globally, in terms of finances, but also in terms of awareness. As part of the Sustainable Development Goals, we have significant components where we are looking at hunger on the one hand side, but as well as disease prevention on the other side. So I think the most important progress is creating awareness at all levels, and that may also be part of the challenge, because if you look at what a person eats, how much they eat, that's not an accident. It is shaped by many factors and many role players. So if you look at a so-called food environment that you find yourself in as an individual, that's very complex. So that includes a political environment, an economic environment. It's not only the food system of the producer, the manufacturer, the retailer, and the consumer. So there are trade agreements, there are agricultural considerations, there's drought and other environmental factors. The other side of that is environmental sustainability and awareness about the impact of our food systems on the environment. So I do think the main positive at this point is the awareness, and that it's on the agenda and it's being talked about. And probably the challenge is to bring all these stakeholders around a table with a common goal of improving nutrition for all, which can only be achieved if all these different systems and different factors are all coming together, from the economic side to the political to agriculture, and if we share a common goal.
Yeah. What are some of the international best practices that you have observed, for example, in schools, speaking in broad terms, that other countries have adopted, particularly to introduce the idea of nutrition at a school level?
I think at school level, there's 2 components that I would prioritize. The first one being nutrition education. So the information we give children from a young age about what is good nutrition, what are good food choices, so that is a component of consumer behavior, is your knowledge. So it is one component. A second one is also the food environment at the school. So we have a very diverse country. We have children in lower quintile schools who may be benefiting from the National School Nutrition Program as a meal. And then we have other settings where children have access to a tuck shop, or there's a school vendor, or there is a cafeteria at the school, etc. And that's another important component, is within the school environment, not only what we teach and what we educate on, but also what is accessible there. And I think important lessons there is around shaping the entire school environment towards that shift in nutrition, towards whole food, real food, closer to the source food, and away from the highly processed. So that would include what you stock at a tuck shop, or what is stocked by vendors. But at the same time, it really does not serve a purpose if it doesn't go along with education and the demand. So it is a combination of supply and demand. In the end, even at school level, you can have the most nutritious food on the table. If the children do not want it, it's not going to benefit. So that, to me, would be a very important consideration in terms of our school environment.
Yeah. Then in terms of food control, I mean, it's a broad term which includes safety, nutrition, quality, and value. But on the question of maintaining nutrients level, for example, policy around sugar tax has been introduced in South Africa. Is that effective in any way? And are we insisting on ensuring that the standards that we have set are achieved?
I think with regards to specifically our health promotion levy, or the so-called sugar tax, there is evidence coming to the forefront that is showing benefit, that is showing that there are an outcome in terms of reduced consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. Why are we targeting sugar-sweetened beverages? It's because the direct, proven, shown evidence that there's a direct relation between the increased consumption of these sugar-sweetened beverages and our non-communicable diseases, including obesity. Obesity is both a disease as well as a risk factor for these diseases. So there is definitely evidence emerging that it is successful. There are even calls for a further increase, which is maybe not the topic for discussion today. But I think, yeah, what is important is where there are interventions, whether you can consider, again, a carrot and a stick initiative, where there's a regulation in place to limit sugar content or to reduce salt content. That is a regulatory component that comes with monitoring of implementation, and then also action if there is transgression or non-compliance. And then you have the other component of the carrot, which makes it, attractive for the consumer as well as the producer to want to change what is available to the end user. And again, from my view, that goes along with nutrition education, so that you can have the demand side. But at the same time, we should not forget our economic context and the huge inequalities we have in South Africa. So if we talk about South Africa, we're talking about 60 million people with the high inequality in our country. It's fairly complex to keep in mind the different socioeconomic levels and what they can access and what becomes affordable at that level. So yeah, that again comes down to economic policies as well, that we need to make healthy foods more affordable but also more accessible.
Right, fantastic. Maria van der Merwe, stay with us. Linda Drummond, as well as Ramoroka and Rebone, Ntsie is still with us tonight. The question of nutrition and whether we are getting enough in South Africa and there's enough safety protocols being put in place to ensure that there is an equal standard that all are adhering to. We'll take more of your thoughts on that when we continue next. Stay with us. In focus tonight on Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405, a conversation on nutrition tonight as the nation observes National Nutrition Week. Ramoroka, Rebone, Ntsie, Linda Drummond, Maria van der Merwe with us tonight. Earlier on, of course, we had that story from Bongani. Makama also was a part of this conversation. Let's come back to you then, Rebone, on particularly that question of enforcement and ensuring that the companies are adhering to the set standards as far, for example, as sugar content is concerned? How is government enforcing that?
Thank you, Bongani. Before I could come to the question of enforcing, and I think I need to emphasize why we have such regulations. Earlier on, you asked the question about what is going right in the country, and a number of things have been mentioned. But I think it's important for us to start at where are we in terms of what is not going right. As a country, we are having a serious problems with regards to issues of nutrition, and we need to really pay attention to that, because at the moment, 68% of women in South Africa are either overweight and obese. 40% of them are actually in obesity category, and 20% in the severe category. And you know that obesity is a major risk factor for non-communicable disease, which we have seen during this COVID pandemic, that people who are having comorbidities were the worst of affected. So those are some of the important things that we really need to look at, and what forces regulations to take place. And we cannot only work with regulations. All of us, we need to play a role. And we need to start correctly. For example, only 23% of children aged 6 to 23 months are actually fed minimum acceptable diet. So we are actually starting with feeding unhealthy foods to children at a much earlier age. So the situation is really bleak. And majority of us are actually eating far less what is recommended in terms of our healthy foods intake, vegetables, fruit, and so on. And a number of people that are even having hypertension, for example, are not even intending to lower their salt intake when asked during a survey. So we can see that as a country, we really have a number of issues that we need to address and take into consideration. Hence, some of these things lead us to regulations. Where there's regulations for salt, as mentioned, regulation for sugar. Of course, as government, we are working with the industry in terms of compliance, and I must commend the country, our industry, that they are actually complying to the regulations that are there. The sugar tax, of course, it is calculated at the production level, and the tax goes. So there's compliance in terms of that, because of the mechanisms that are put in place in that collection, the levy collection. But with regards to the salt regulations, they were first implemented published in 2013. The first target was for 2016, and the industry actually met the target. And in 2019, there was a second target to reduce even the salts further. And we have reports indicating that the industry is actually meeting the targets. So in terms of regulation, the industry, food industry, is complying. But where is not regulated, and there are a number of areas where there's no regulation, then not much is done. And those are the things that actually contribute to poor nutrition in the South African population.
Linda, let's come back to you then. What are the consumer patterns currently when it comes to what they are buying, and has it changed with the onset of the pandemic?
Thanks so much, Thabo. That is a difficult question for me to answer because of the nature of the work that I do at the Consumer Goods Council. I'm not necessarily dealing with consumer buying patterns data or even price data and so on. I work within a division that focuses on compliance to food regulations and also around voluntary initiatives on making healthier food options available. So in terms of the patterns, I will rely then on research in terms of what's available out there. And essentially, it's been mentioned this evening, and it's been happening over a number of years, where there's been a transition in people's eating patterns and behaviors, namely that they've moved away from their traditional sort of eating patterns, which were higher in fruits and vegetables and traditional staples, to more of your processed prepackaged foods, which, aren't necessarily a concern in themselves, but when they're highly processed, high in sugar, high in fat, high in salt, and energy dense without providing micronutrients, they start contributing to this problem of obesity, which you've also heard is a risk factor for non-communicable diseases, but is a disease in itself. So essentially that shift has been happening, and we're at an advanced stage in that shift. And we've heard this evening that there are many factors that are driving that. There's data available through Statistics South Africa, for example, on food purchasing behaviors and so on, but I am not necessarily the expert on talking to that data. Yeah. But it's publicly available, and you can see the shifts in these types of patterns. And the pandemic itself, just with people changing their behaviors in general, not going into work, being at home all of the time, only shopping on certain days, right back at the beginning of the lockdown, all of that has changed, what people are eating, how they're preparing it, whether they're eating in front of a screen or, just in general, the patterns are changing. And there was an opportunity, and I think there still is an opportunity for this to be transformed for the good, in that if we're home more or we're working more flexibly, that we are able to prepare more home-based meals, eat together as a family, and recreate some of the things that have been lost over the last couple of years and even decades. Not here only, but globally, we've seen all of these shifts. So I hope that gives some insight.
So certainly it does. But the other question that I hope maybe you can be able to give us an answer with some certainty: food fraud, misinformation. I mean, food being, for example, being labeled as healthy and natural. How rife is that situation in South Africa?
So food fraud is a global issue, and it takes the shape and form it takes the many forms. So mislabeling, you've given an example of that. Miscommunicating about the healthfulness of a product, or what it contains, or misrepresenting a product is a form of food fraud. There are others, and I don't think we have time to go into all of that, but essentially food labeling forms part of the regulations that are available in South Africa. As Rebone has mentioned, there are so many governing composition of food, but also labeling. And those are being checked on a regular basis. And as part of my work at Consumer Goods Council, I'm also helping to look at labels and guide particularly your small and medium enterprises who don't have the expertise in understanding regulations, implementing them, etc. So we all have a role to play in making sure that information is correct, but there is more work to be done, particularly in certain outlets where there is a demand for foods that are perhaps they've got health halos and claims which aren't necessarily substantiated or evidence-based, and people buy into that, and those aren't always checked on. So there is an opportunity to improve food labeling in South Africa, and as Rebone has mentioned, to make it simpler for people to understand. But yes, I think as a whole, we have good labeling in this country. It's been in effect for a long time, but there is an opportunity to clamp down on the misleading communication that occurs, unfortunately, everywhere.
Yeah. Arthur, how is South Africa getting the message across, particularly to remote areas? How are those people being assisted in getting information on healthy living and healthy nutrition?
Yes, Tabo, we know that currently, nutrition information source is the challenge, because people don't necessarily have access to evidence-based nutrition information. People rely on some platforms that may not be credible. People get messages passed around their WhatsApp broadcast messages, but also even social media now is spreading nutrition messages that are not necessarily credible or very sound. And I think we need credible platforms, to step up to the plate to support, government efforts in trying to alleviate all these nutrition challenges that we highlighted in tonight's discussion. It becomes important so that also those nutrition messages are tailored, to the particular consumer communities that are targeted for, simplifying those and translating those into languages that, would make all consumers understand, what is being communicated to them, and really explaining it in simpler terms. And I guess also just we are in the National Nutrition Week, and the emphasis this year is around eating more fruit and vegetables. As Rebone indicated, that we don't always meet our fruit and vegetable quota as South Africa. I mean, there are programs now that are looking at 5 a day and really helping consumers and inspiring them to make sure that whatever they have in their plate is really explained in a simple way, taking a plate format and say, this is the amount of food you need to have, because quite often nutrition information can be intimidating for a lot of people, and quite convoluted. So we need to simplify it and make it really to resonate with the consumer that is receiving that particular message, so that we are able to change one plate at a time, so that we are able to improve the nutrition status of South Africa.
Yeah. Speaking of improving the nutrition, Rebone, is government mitigating the cost situation versus, of course, healthy eating and access to food?
Indeed, Thabo, government is making a lot of effort in mitigating the situation to ensure that the food becomes affordable. If you will remember that all the healthy foods are zero rated, those are some of the efforts that government is making, but also supporting the local farmers and smallholder farmers to ensure that they are producing adequate amounts of nutritious foods that can then be sold at an affordable price. And also government is making available food at schools, for example, through the National School Nutrition Program, and also a number of social relief of distress programs where vulnerable communities are actually assisted in ensuring that they get food available. Of course, the State South Africa and Department of Agriculture, Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, they are looking at and monitoring the food prices and ensuring that the prices do not skyrocket to a point where the food, healthy food becomes unaffordable to majority of South Africans. So there are a number of interventions that are taking place to ensure that those prices are reduced. So those are some of the things that I can think of and mention at the moment in terms of VAT zero rating, but of course all other programs that are actually assisting to ensure that people are able to use the little money that is available to have access to healthier foods.
All right, we'll continue in a moment with our guests and take your views tonight on WhatsApp and what you think on the levels of nutrition in the country and what could be done to mitigate that. 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us at Newzroom405. In Focus continues for you in a moment. So In Focus, interrogating nutrition in the country and affordability thereof, but also some of the ethical issues that come with it, especially when it comes to food fraud and misinformation or incorrect labeling, so to speak, and how to mitigate and what all the players within the space, including the consumers, can do to better derive the nutrition that they require. Let's have a look at what you're saying tonight on WhatsApp. 072-110-5584. These are your thoughts on the conversation tonight and what we have been looking at. Demi Lee in Morningside says, I believe consumers should take responsibility as they are in full control of what they consume, how much they consume, and how they consume it. David Makau in Kukun in Limpopo saying, I think the level of health ignorance due to poverty plays a bigger role, which then says the government should use its inspectors to assess fast food outlets. Finally, as consumers, we have a bigger role to play in refraining from unhealthy dietary habits. Rebone, what do you say to the question that David is raising on the inspectors checking out fast foods and ensuring that health and nutrition standards are being kept?
Thank you, Thabo, for that question. Indeed, we have food inspectors that are based in local municipalities. Their main responsibilities are looking at food safety issues and with regard to looking at the nutrition content of the food, especially in fast food restaurants, that has not been happening yet. But we are engaging with the Consumer Good Council through Linda's unit, where we are working with the quick service restaurant sectors. They have voluntarily commitments, which is a problem because when something is voluntarily, not everybody is playing a role, but others are playing a role where they are making sure that we have more healthy options in the fast food outlets and making sure that the food that they are serving is less in sugar, less in salt, less in fat, and they're actually using good products. For example, the type of fats that are used. But one of the other things is also to ensure that healthier foods are sold. For example, we don't only have for example, fried potatoes or chips, as we call them, as a side, but we can have vegetables, we can have salads, and we don't only have a sugar-sweetened beverage or fizzy drinks as a side, as a beverage, but we can have water. So those are some of the efforts that are actually done to ensure that the fast food restaurant or the quick service restaurant are also improving in terms of provisioning of healthy meals. But in terms of inspectors, that is not yet an area that is regulated and that health inspectors are looking at the moment. They're looking at food safety issues.
All right, David, hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for that WhatsApp. You can keep them coming, 072-110-5584. We'll take more of those. Now, Maria, David says ignorance around the poor. I don't think really it's ignorance more than it is affordability. For example, Linda mentions that the assumption was we are all at home and so therefore we will cook at home and eat healthier. What I found is that when I try to do that, there is a price situation that almost comes into play. How significant a role does price play in making the healthier choice?
Absolutely, Thabo. And again, I'm going to refer to what I said earlier in terms of our very diverse population. But a significant proportion of that population is not in a position where they can really say, I can choose what's on my plate. So they are very often reliant on what is available locally because of transportation costs to go elsewhere to buy. And in this whole food system and this chain of what reaches your table in the end, fresh produce, for example, is usually notably more expensive. And the reason for that is the nature of the product. It's perishable. You need to move it quickly from the producer through the value chain down to the consumer. And we've seen, specifically in the last year or 18 months, that the cost of fresh produce have increased. So in the end, if you are in a maybe a rural setting or a socioeconomic situation where you are relying on what is available at the local spaza shop or at the nearest shop, that is again where you are first of all limited in terms of your options, but second of all, what is on the shelves there is determined by behavior. So it becomes almost a cycle again of supply and demand, and the main driver behind that is affordability. So that is where highly processed foods comes in and often end up being more affordable than healthier alternatives or foods that are part of a healthy diet. And that's where the food industry has that role to play. But it also starts on the agriculture side, where we have a fairly high production of starchy produce that do not necessarily have a very high nutritional value. And that then again gets further processed and becomes staple food. So we typically have a fairly monotonous starch-based diet as a standard South African. So with that being said, that to add to that diet is then restricted very often by your socioeconomic circumstances.
Look, I mean, I saw some intervention, for example, from the Competition Commission. There was a whole lot of reports around the price of pineapple shooting up. We'll not get into the reasons why it shot up. There was also a whole lot of increases that were put on a bag of potatoes, for example, that really shot up in terms of price. Are those interventions enough?
Well, I think that was specific, to periods in our recent history, which was like the more intense lockdown periods, which limited us further in terms of traveling, in terms of choice, and then in some situations that was taken advantage of. So I think there's overall monitoring of that, but in the end, what the end user is having as his options to choose from is where the concern lies in terms of affordability. If it is cheaper to buy a highly refined starch with a highly processed, high salt protein, and it is more expensive and even more effort to find alternatives to that, again, it comes back to what is the consumer behavior. And to me, it's very much your question at the start of this discussion was, is the industry responsible or is the consumer responsible? And to me, it's not a yes-no question, and it's not a binary concept with either or. It is this entire system that feeds on itself and that causes specific behavior that we need to address. And as Rebone has indicated as well, there are several initiatives to do that. I think the one that we can maybe focus on more and in different ways is what Arthur also brought to discussion in terms of nutrition information and education. And it starts, for example, in our Road to Health booklets that we give our newborn babies. There is very, very detailed information available on how to feed your child. So there are resources, but maybe we can work harder as a nutrition community or a community with interest in nutrition to make sure that those messages go out and that we have informed consumers that will in the end also demand that their healthier options are accessible and affordable.
Yeah. Linda, come back here on the question of compliance. From an ethical perspective, what can and should companies be doing to promote healthier, nutritious consumption?
So companies are in the business of producing, manufacturing, or selling food, or a combination of all of those things, and that's their area of expertise. And they work within the framework, which has, you've heard a lot of different parts of that. But one of the key frameworks that they work within is the regulatory framework, and they're made up of people who have scientific background, some have nutrition knowledge, but mainly food technologists, marketing people, sales people, so people with a wide array of skill sets which aren't necessarily, they don't have the expertise to understand nutrition and health and so on. So they go about their business making foods, and some companies have the luxury of employing experts or consulting to experts on the matters, and they tend to be the ones that actually look at this production of food within a bigger picture and understand the responsibilities and the rights, of consumers, in terms of the health of the nation, as we're discussing. So essentially, it's one has to look at the food industry in that way and say they're doing what they should in the context that they are operating, but they need to become aware and be part of the conversations to actually join the team that is working on the solutions. So not everyone is on that same page, is my understanding, and a lot of my work is trying to raise awareness and get people to understand these concepts. But essentially, it's going to take a lot of cross-functional collaboration and awareness, even within the food industry, to move the needle and to change behavior. So they are doing what they should be, and they're being monitored on what they're being told to do right now. But whether that's enough is really the question, and where we need to move forward so that we can reach those sustainable development goals, and we can reach the rights to nutritious food and all of those bigger picture things which many people are not always aware of. So I hope that gives a perspective on that group.
Fantastic. Much appreciated. Arthur, there's a wager going on in a whole gallery. Just a quick one before I let you go. Is it healthy? Is it more expensive to eat healthier than it is to eat unhealthy, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because we know the effects of not eating healthy is that all these non-communicable diseases that have been mentioned, you can then get a risk of developing those, which will then mean that we are going to put pressure on the healthcare system that is already under pressure. So really the cost of eating unhealthy is one that we've seen, and it's happening now. Even during COVID, we saw that a lot of people who suffered from all these comorbidities in obesity or diabetes, they experience severe symptoms when it comes to that. So I think eating healthier, as people say, is expensive. I think we need to begin understanding what do you talk about?
Unfortunately, I am out of time. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave it there. But thank you very much. I get a sense of where you're going there. Ramoroka, Rebone, Ntsie, Linda Drummond, and Maria van der Merwe. All right, and thank you for being a part of this conversation as well tonight. And big thanks to Bongani Makama as well, sharing your story tonight.